Thanks.
See that mic real quick? I'm sorry, Reynolds. It's red.
Thank you to all for being here tonight in person and via Facebook Live. As you know, our church has committed itself to pursuing uncomfortable conversation that led us to Racial Justice Committee proactively working to further the conversation of our church becoming an anti-racist church. And throughout this journey, we've been striving to find our voice. Tonight, we are giving our Racial Justice Committee the opportunity to share what they have learned, but also to acknowledge that they don't know and still do not understand what they don't know and still do not understand. This is what's so important about the conversation. And tonight, in another step in the journey, we're here to learn from each other, to listen to one another. We don't believe these conversations are easy, but they are necessary. We also believe that no one changes their mind because they are yelled at or told they are wrong. Rather, people learn, listen, and are open to other perspectives through friendship, through conversation, and through civility. I know there's a lot of passion for this issue, and we are passionate, but we also feel called to love people where they are at. We feel called to justice, mercy, where people are at. And there are more conversations to be had, including the book discussion and interfaith panel on April 19th, and Ibram and Kendi speaking to us at the end of April. All exciting things, but this is still one step at a time for our journey. Our panel tonight all have been asked to do the uncomfortable and share their feelings. The opinions are their own. The feelings are their own. They are here to share their view, their perspective, their understanding. We may not always agree, and that does not mean you are wrong. But I believe that in us hearing from a perspective that isn't always familiar to our own is what furthers this conversation and our pursuit of becoming an anti-racist church. So I'm going to invite the panel to introduce themselves, say a bit about themselves and why they are here on this panel, and then we are going to have about an hour of question for which they are invited to respond and conversate among each other. The rest of us are here to listen and learn.
Want me to start? Okay. Mike Draper. I've been a congregant of First Presbyterian for 17 years, maybe. And I became interested in this committee because it was something that I felt I had ignored for a very, very long time, and I wanted to learn more.
My name is Maggie Cook. I've been a member of this church for, I don't know, Wally, how old are you? Anyhow, for a long time, and have been involved in many different things. And this is a committee and a group with a look toward and outreach into our community that I think is very necessary, and I'm pleased to be here.
My name is Garry Ostermueller, and I am a 30-year member of this church and was very proud of the church taking a role in the immigration movement a few years ago. And now when this came along, my wife and I said we've got to get involved in this as well and support the program and support what's going on and to learn more. So.
I'm Abby Kozo. I've been going to this church since I was about 3. And I'm on this committee because this church is a leader in this community, and I knew that we needed to be outspoken about this topic, and I'm happy to be a young voice in it.
I'm Virginia Shaw. I've been a member of this church for 20 years. Racial justice is a topic, especially as the mother of a young man, a young black man, that definitely is something I should be involved in. And quite frankly, I love my church. I love my church family. You only have a limited number of black voices due to the black population and brown population of the church. So I'm proud to be one of the voices.
My name is Paul Gunser. I've been a member of this congregation for about 25 years now. The events over the summer of 2020 made me think that I needed to do something, that I simply could no longer stand idly by, and that's what drove me to join the Racial Justice Committee.
Hello, my name's Wally Cook. I've been a member of this church for, I don't know, Mom, how old am I? But I am somebody who works a lot with the young people of this church, and I know that this is something they are passionate about, and I wanted to be somebody who shared that passion with them and could speak to them and with them about this. So that's what caused me, along with some of the other things mentioned by the people on this panel, to join the Racial Justice Committee.
Well, I just want to say that this last series of months and your work has been one of my proudest moments as a pastor. And I remember the moment in the committee meeting, Virginia, when we were in a really hard moment, and it was your voice that rose up, and it changed my life. And you know, I think that's what this is all about, is that we all want to change for the better with each other, and we're not going to do that by just going off and thinking about it. We've got to talk about it, work it through. And this committee has been an amazing thing to be a part of. And I feel like I'm more of a part than a leader. And I really appreciate that a lot, to find the voice of the congregation and for the congregation to speak. And so I say that because, you know, generally, you know, to be on a panel is often, you know, we brought in our series of experts. And I know that most people in this moment, I think through the process of this committee, feel like there's more that you don't know than maybe what you know, or maybe how we look at things is growing, and it's like we're reporting in. And I feel like this is a moment for us to report in where we are in the process. And I really appreciate everybody being here and the courage to be here. And so I'm picking on you, Virginia. I'm going to start with you because you're on the first question, and that's what Justin told me to do, so that's what I'm doing. But it really, this question is framed in one of two ways, and you take it wherever way you want it. But you know, this last year with the events that have happened either in the nation, in our community, in our church, in your heart, how has that altered the way you look at this challenge of racial justice? How have the events of the year shaped you?
Well, initially, I was really ashamed. I was born here in the United States. My family on both sides goes back to 1800. So I, more so than a lot of people, should know more about the horrible things that have been done. And I know terrible things have happened. I was very young during all the civil rights movement. Over the course of years, person after person's been shot. So many things have happened, and I've been horrified at the moment, like everyone else. And then I went on with my life, and I pretty much felt that way till my son got old enough to drive, and I figured out he could be the next statistic. Then with the events of the past year, sadly, the effects to me of COVID-19 was people had nothing else to do but worry about their fellow man. And so everybody suddenly realized, whether they agreed that Black Lives Mattered or not, started to see that there was a pattern and that some people didn't seem to be worth as much as other people. So I'm here because, again, proud Black American, again, mother of a Black man, and because even now, all these years later, when I should have understood what was really, really, really happening so long ago, it's not too late for me to understand, and it's not too late for me to have a voice and to say my part.
Wow. Thanks for that. Garry, I know you mentioned the immigration issue and becoming a part of that. How did the events of this year compel you to action and shape the way you look at the need for justice?
The events of this year, when the murder of George Floyd and the justified outrage of the Black community, and just watching the video and seeing what had happened over and over again, and just realizing that treating people this negative way, it's wrong. To me, it's so much of it comes down to what's right and what's wrong. And just because the gentleman was wearing a badge when he did it, by no means excused what was going on. And a lot of the outrage that that came from that is what got me to think that it's time to speak up. It's time to get our voice out there more and into the public eye and say that this is wrong. There is right and wrong in the world, and this is wrong to treat people that way. So that's really where I feel the justice has to go.
Thanks, Garry.
So Abby, we've talked a lot in the last few years, confirmation, youth group, about these topics. For you, especially in this last year, what's the most important thing you've learned? What surprised you? What stood out? What shaped you?
It has to be that racism isn't all I thought it was, and that every system in this country was built to put down certain people, and that I can't call myself a caring, politically active, progressive person without caring about something like this, and without taking action, and without uplifting other people. And I think that's the most important thing that I've learned, that it's not about me, and it's not about, yes, I'm becoming a better person, but it's not about me becoming a better person. It's about uplifting others' voices, and that I have the privilege to do that.
Thanks, Abby. Paul, we've also had a lot of conversations. And in Fred's office, planning sessions, meeting, the three of us have gone round and round on what we're learning, what we're exploring, what's going to be a trigger point for some of the congregation and the community, what's going to help us grow. So I know this is a personal question, but what has been your biggest learning moment throughout all this?
My biggest learning moment has internalizing, knowing how much I don't know. My single biggest point would be that all of the history I learned throughout school was sanitized, was through someone else's eyes. In almost every case, probably without exception, not through the eyes of a person of color. And now, by having the opportunity to read books on racism, especially Isabella Wilkerson's book, Caste, it's so obvious for me to understand the history that I just had no knowledge of, was just ignorant of. And now I have that history. So I'm much more educated and much more aware than I was, than what my store of history was of what people of color have been going through for 400 years in this country and continue to go through.
Thanks, Paul.
So Mike, you were in the meeting when the session voted to have awkward conversations, hard conversations. And I remember trying at that moment to wonder what that was going to look like. So my question is, did we realize our dream? Were there hard moments in this last 6-7 months for you? And what was hard?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about something like racism, the conversations have to be hard because the topic is hard, right? It affects so many people in so many negative ways. You know, what was hard about it was, you know, realizing that while I, you know, Mike, am willing to now have that conversation, not necessarily everybody is ready to have that conversation. And that's hard. Because everybody wants, I want to believe that everybody's ready and wants to have that conversation, but it's like anything else. That you want people to change their behavior, they have to be willing to engage. It has to be owned by them. Have we had difficult conversations? Absolutely. We've had difficult conversations about banners and words, and those are important because it's things like symbols and words that have created a lot of the hate and a lot of the negative feeling as it pertains to race. So to have those conversations on the flip side made sense to do it and do it right, or at least try to do it righter than we have.
Maggie, what about you? Did you struggle in the midst of the conversations, or was the hard part for you something else? Where did the challenge come for you?
I think the hard part was what I had to explore and I had to really look at, which was looking at issues of systematic racism and realizing that there were differing views within our family, our friends, our church. And it was difficult to look at the numbers and the statistics and to see the hurt that racism caused. There's no room for hate in our church, but racism is all around us, and we have to really realize that. And it was hard. It was hard to hear, it was hard to read, it was hard to learn.
Thanks.
So if we have a dial, we're about to turn it up. And a lot of this question is your voice, your perspective, and emphasizing your voice and your perspective. Abby, I know you've had these conversations. So when you've encountered, let's use the word resistance to the statement, Black Lives Matter, What's been your reaction, both internal, external? How have you felt? What's that been like?
I feel really frustrated because I feel like how can someone not see this? It's so obvious, it's so clear, it's so wrong. How can anybody disagree with this or disprove this, say that it's not real, and that all lives matter, and that Black people don't have it harder. And for me to realize that I come from an extremely lucky place. I come from a progressive church and a progressive family and parents who taught me to stand up for things like this. That's something that I've really had to be in touch with in the past year, that part of me that's how can other people be so dumb if I know that this is the right thing to do, that this is the right thing to fight for. And that's really my first reaction, that they have all the facts in front of them and they're all just as educated as I am, but they choose to do the wrong thing. And I hate them for it.
Thanks, Abby. It's raw and real. So Virginia, Fred said it already, but as we were navigating, what should the banner say? And you...
The banner should have said and did say, Black Lives Matter. I'm not the most civil person. The most I've gotten out of the whole committee is that I've toned myself down some. Like Abby, I thought it was absolutely absurd, and it's taken me months. At the time that it was all going on, I realized that there were other factors involved. People worrying about whether other people would leave the church and all, things like that. So I got to the point where I could understand, some people's particular fears. As far as the statement itself, even as less than 2 weeks ago, a Black person was killed for jaywalking. I mean, it's not like it hasn't stopped. I've allowed myself to stay raw, let it stay raw, so that I won't turn my head like I did when I was younger because I couldn't stand it, the pain. See, I've let myself go rambling off. But what I find, especially like let's say in our Metuchen Edison bubble, is that there are a lot of non-Black people that may be in denial because they see me or the other people in the town that are like them, economically, socially, et cetera, and they don't see any kind of problem because they don't know anyone outside of us. They haven't been to Trenton or Camden or seen any of these poor kids that will never have a chance because they're in these horrible neighborhoods with horrible schools and drugs everywhere. So whereas me coming from a blue-collar background, had a chance, these kids are squashed from the time they're little. So, okay, and we live in a system that squashes them. Nobody sends the money there because the town has nothing, the cities have nothing to offer. So when I hear somebody resistant to Black Lives Matter at this point, having thought about it for months, I realize that they've never seen the big picture. But at the same time, I have yet to get one phone call or text from anyone asking me anything about why I feel about Black Lives Matter. And when we last had a panel, I certainly offered, and I offered in love, and it still would be a conversation in love. The offer is still there, it will always be there. I'm just waiting for somebody to take me up on it.
I hope they're listening, because we've learned so much in this conversation from you and Abby, and we're following your lead.
So I'm gonna flip the question around to you, Paul, in a different way. I know that there is resistance, and I remember the Sunday morning that the banner went up across the front of the church. Somebody stopped their truck in the middle of the street and shouted at me and then drove off. And just really don't have that on Sunday morning generally. And you know, I tried to think, why would that person feel the need to shout at me? Where did that come from? I mean, have you thought about that, about where the resistance to this comes from, where the struggle comes from? It's kind of the opposite question that Justin just asked.
Yeah, I have thought about it. Right off the top of my head, one of my responses would be, it comes from fear. That's one area that it comes from. I'm not I don't know. There's so much I don't know about people's views on racism. I don't know where the fear comes from. I believe some of the fear comes from the individual at some level understanding that their views that they've held for a long time, that have always been a part of them, aren't correct. And that at some level they know it. But they are fearful because they don't know how to address it and how to look further past their nose.
No, I think that's the fear is the root of anger. So if there's anger, there's got to be some fear there. But Wally, do you look at it how Paul looks at it? Like fear is a defining factor here, or is there something else at work for you when you think about why people would struggle with this so much? Why is there so much resistance to it? You're trying to step into their perspective. What would be there?
Well, am I on? Yes, I'm on. So it's hard not to just sort of agree wholeheartedly with Virginia and Paul. I think they've both covered it beautifully. I think that part of it is political. I think we've lost our ability to speak about things we see as political genially. Everything gets turned up to 11. I think there's part of it that is sort of people don't want to, it's an assault on the way some people see the world. I've noticed in my life that we are always a lot more critical about the way black people protest than the things they are protesting about. Because it's a lot easier to do that. You know, that if it becomes a question about how the protesting is happening, it becomes a style discussion. You can move the goalpost to another thing. You don't have to interact with the root injustice. So, you know, the Black Lives Matter, what all lives matter thing it's a way to almost negate the uncomfortable truth in the center of the conversation. And again, I think that fear is a root of, I think it's absolutely true that there's a fear in that. There's a fear in the thought that the world as I see it is not how it is. And I just, it's in the spirit of trying to be empathetic, I would say I'm sure that there are some people that just feel that their lives are hard and they don't want to feel like there's a discussion about people's lives being hard that they are not part of. Again, I think that I don't think that's the main reason. I think the sort of people that say all lives matter would say that's the main reason. But in the spirit of empathy, we unfortunately also live in a time where a lot of people don't feel like their life matters, and that's why that's sort of the name that they're giving their resistance. But I think it's mostly just a resistance of fear and a resistance of not wanting to engage with the truth that shakes the foundations of how they see the world.
Thanks, Wally.
So Garry, we've asked the Racial Justice Committee in session to lead, for the church to be learning what it means to be anti-racist. And we're going to keep doing that for quite some time. Good. I don't think that's going to change. We only go as far as our leaders lead us, but by you all here, you're leading us. So if the church is doing what it's supposed to do, we're struggling along, trying to find our way, how do you think a church like our own should be a leader in the community, which we haven't done yet? We have been very intentional about identifying for ourselves who we are and our learning spots, where we need to seek forgiveness. Next step coming up is, okay, now what do we do in the community? How do you envision that? What does that look like?
First and foremost, I think it's very important that the church plays a major role in this. And it was great to be part of the committee and also for the church to be active in promoting the racial justice and doing the learning steps that we have between reading the books and the conversations, and some of them have been hard conversations, but learning it all. I think that a church like ours needs to take a point in the community, and we do need to become more public with this. We've got our foundation begun, and it's nowhere near finished, but we do have our foundation going forward. And it is the church, not only our church, but throughout the country, really, where we have to show that everybody is God's people. I listened to your sermon yesterday, Justin, where you talked about John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Didn't say he gave his son to white guys. Didn't say he gave his son to the Presbyterian Church in Metuchen. It said to all people is the implication. And I truly feel that the church needs to lead all people in its openness. And we need to continue moving forward that way.
I want to apologize that you listened to the sermon, but I'm glad that was your takeaway. So if Garry emphasized the community, Virginia, let's expand this. How can the church, using the big C, change this country? If the heart of this country has the sin of racism, what's the church's role as you see it?
I mean, that's kind of a very difficult question. And I can't go, in my mind at this point, farther than what you've been doing in this church, which has been educating people through the sermons as to, not so much as to them, a person in particular being racist, but things that they may be doing that are racist. Nobody wants to hear that they're a racist when they love everyone, but that doesn't mean you're not. That doesn't mean I'm not in my own way or anyone else. So I think the more all churches can turn people into looking into themselves, seeing what challenges them about other people. Until you can have that, in order to love everybody else, you got to love yourself. You got to look at yourself, say yes. Yep, I'm guilty of that. Because we're all guilty of something when it comes to how we judge other people or look at other people. But it has to, the conversation, the church has to lead an internal conversation in addition to the external one that we're having, with our members and then the community. But people have to look into themselves. Because I agree that fear is a lot of the issue. And you can't fight fear unless you can look it in the face. And if you look into your heart, and you think about who you are and who you want to be, as you know, as a person, then you kind of figure it out, and then you'll be able to walk forward.
So I'm preaching again on April 11th. If you want to preach in my place, that is yours.
So I'm going to give you, I don't know how you drew the short straw, Abby, but you get the really tough questions tonight. So here's a real tough one, because I've encountered this question, and people get really frustrated. And it's a question of white privilege. And I'll have people like push back to me and say, I've earned what I had. It wasn't given to me. I'm not privileged. And I feel like saying, I'm not saying you're given everything, but there's a kind of privilege that comes to race in our country. And there's a lack of privilege that can come with race as well. Can you help me or give me a sense of how you've wrestled through this with that whole idea of white privilege, and what does that mean to you?
The way I see it is, no one is trying to take away anyone's success in life or anyone's hard work in life. And white privilege is the idea that we didn't all start the same on this earth, and that white people and black people could work just as hard as one another, but white people are always going to have that platform from the beginning of their life of people speaking out for them, of policies being made for them, of policies being made against other people that aren't them. And that's the hardest thing for white people to face, that their success isn't just from them working hard, and that they were helped in a way that others weren't. And in a way where it was all just luck, and that we were all just born this way. And it's hard for some white people to then be proud of being white, as I have sometimes felt, how I'm ashamed of my ancestors. And it's also hard for some people to realize that, you know, maybe white people haven't always been these perfect hard workers, and maybe they have had that extra ledge along the way. And that, again, is the hardest thing for white people to face, even people who want to stand up to racism. And that's the whole idea of Make America Great Again. It's, without trying to get political, it's that same idea of going back to a time where being white was enough in life to get ahead of others. And that's what white privilege is, and that's the hardest conversation in all of this, in my opinion.
So, Mike, I think Abby really described well, like the big picture of white privilege. But I know in reading Ibram Kendi's work and other people's work, there's also these small ways of privilege, small pieces that once you start to see them, you go, oh my gosh, oh. I mean, have you encountered that in terms of white privilege? Is that part of how you look at this?
Yeah, I mean, and the fun part is you can't unsee it. You know, you start to see it, and you start to unpeel it, and you start to see more of it, and you realize how much is around you. And to echo Abby's point, you know, that is a hard conversation to have. I've had it with family members. They've had the same response. But you've worked so hard for what you got. I have, but I can't help but wonder if I didn't get help along the way because of the color of my skin. And, you know, I've got two sons who are both way more socially aware than I am. But I can't help but wonder if they've been sort of helped along the way as well. And then it's going to continue to be that way until we level the playing field. You know, and it starts early when 2 third graders raise their hand, one white child and one child of color, and they're both called on equally in class, right? When they grow up and they go and work for the same company and they both get promoted at the same time. When they go to get mortgages and they both get mortgages at the same time, and one doesn't have to wait and provide more paperwork and provide more paperwork and maybe never get it. Until that stuff goes away, until we really truly level the playing field, the idea of white privilege is going to continue. And I've said this way too many times, like, white privilege and racism isn't, and this is hard to hear and hard to say, isn't theory, it's not philosophy, it's data, it's fact, it exists. It's numbers that anybody watching on Facebook right now can open a Google page and find immediately, and it's staggering. And that's when I saw that, that's when I realized, oh, I've turned a blind eye to this for far too long.
Thanks.
So I feel like this question is almost a gimme. It's so obvious, and yet it's not obvious. Garry, why aren't we farther along in this? We've been having this conversation forever. Abolitionists, civil rights leaders, faith leaders, generations, and here we are.
The first thing that comes to my mind is fear. People afraid of giving up something. You know, if the white people have something, they don't want to give it up to anybody, especially a black person, because the black person's different, or a person of any color. You know, you can keep having this conversation over and over, and until the cycle breaks out where people are communicating more and they are more comfortable with each other. We're always going to have that. Friday night we watched the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Was on TMC, or we recorded it off of TMC, and it was amazing. That movie was made 50 years ago, and so much has not progressed at all in 50 years. And there was the fears in that came out in the movie, of people trying to understand each other, but only on a very limited basis. So we just need to keep working together, communicating together, and breaking down those barriers as things go along.
Sounds like I have a movie to watch. So, Paul, same question. Fear is probably a similar response you may have, but if it isn't that, what is it? And if it is fear, how have you experienced that being a hindrance in this conversation?
Say the question again?
So the original question is, why aren't we farther along? And Garry did a great job of saying, well, it's fear. It's not the fear of the unknown. So if that is your experience of others, how? And if it's something else, what is it?
I say this to my wife a lot. As a nation, we had 400 years of slavery. It's going to take us 400 years before we put this behind us. That's how I feel. So we're 200 years into this. We've got another 200 years to go. Since I was a child of the early 50s, 1953, the steps just seem like they're so slow. What I've seen with my own eyes as a child, what I have seen as a teenager, what I've seen as a young adult, what I've seen as a middle-aged person, what I've seen as a senior citizen now. It's slow. I do believe that we may be onto something. And the something is the hard conversation. It is a hard conversation. But if we could all of us, no matter where we're coming at racism from, have the hard conversation. On the Racial Justice Committee, we really haven't had hard conversations on the Racial Justice Committee because we're all of a kind of, sort of, a similar mind. But when you have the opportunity to have a hard conversation, it is very hard and it is very difficult, but it's worthwhile. You feel like you're making some progress if there can be some civility and you can talk about your differences. Not much of an answer. Rambling.
I disagree. I found that to be really profound. Thanks, Paul.
So Virginia, my favorite question is the next one, and it's it comes from a quote that the Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. It's tough. But what I like about it is this idea of, it kind of goes against a lot of what we've been saying here tonight about the hard conversation. But how can we imagine a joyous exchange? So, when I go to New Hope Baptist Church, it's fun. And I don't know if Ron Owens has as much fun when he comes here, but I hope so. And what does that reconciliation look like to you? Can you even see it or imagine it, or is it something this is too far off?
For me personally, I think it's something that's too far off. As far as if you're saying we visit each other, that's fine. I think one of the original questions had how to get the churches like. I don't want to use like busing, but mixed. That's not possible, because people worship differently, and people are going to go to the church that they're comfortable at. The first time my family came to this church was in 1992 when Jackson was a baby. The church was packed to the point where it was pretty much almost standing room only, and as far as I could see, we were the only black people. There's one black woman that was down here somewhere. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know her. I know who she is now. And that we had other things going on. So it was several years before we came back to the church again. One of the conversations we had was, well, should we go there, or should we find a church that that has more black people in it? Because we don't know if they really want us. Now, mind you, we stepped in here, we gave the address, we got mail, people, it was wonderful. So you knew you were welcome. So long story short, you see we're here. We wanted to be in our community, and this is our community. So all of that being said, if you go to a Presbyterian church in the South, even if it's black, if it's all black, it's nothing like this church, because that is not, the way we worship here is not typically the way that a black church would work. There's plenty of swaying, and if there's no swaying, they're going to go home. So, so what I'm really trying to say is I think it's a great idea for us to get together with New Hope, and for New Hope to get together with us, be it like on a Sunday afternoon sing, or even to come to worship. But ultimately, in the end, I think that Sunday will always be the most segregated hour in this country, and it's just because of the way the differences in which not just, Black people, just the differences in general of how people worship, because we're not like the Roman Catholics, in which the services are very similar, the music is very similar. Whether you go to a Methodist church, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Baptist, the way, and regardless of color, the way people worship is different, and you can't take that. That's not something I think that anybody should ever sacrifice. I would not go to New Hope Baptist Church. I'm Black. I'm not Baptist. I'm Presbyterian. I will always be Presbyterian. So I will visit and I'll have a nice time, but when I come back, I'll still be the same Presbyterian that sits here on Sundays. So I don't think you can unsegregate.
Okay, all right. Well, Garry, let's take what Virginia is saying and maybe take it in a different direction. Because, you got Paul saying we got 2 centuries to go, and Virginia's saying, oh, we got a ways to go. But is there concrete things we can do now where we can feel we're getting closer? And it doesn't have to be worship. It could be something that the church is. Yeah. Let's think outside the box a little bit. Have you think about how would that, what would it look like to have a coming together? Is it possible? You can just say, I don't think so.
I do think it's possible. I think it's partly possible because many of the people that are either in this room or watching us on Facebook would show up. Maybe a picnic, maybe something where you got the two communities together to meet each other, to talk to each other. You may see them as neighbors down the street, but you really don't know them until you're in a room together and you get some kind of mingling and interaction happening. And that's one way that the conversation could continue. I appreciate what Virginia is saying as far as the different styles of worship are different, let's just say. But we're all, it's the common purpose that we have to look at of, being introduced to each other, being some form of a racial harmony by knowing people. And until walls and barriers are broken down, those relationships are not going to foster.
Thanks for that. Okay, you go for it, Virginia.
I was specifically referring to worship services,
Okay.
Not anything outside of worship. I think outside of, like I'm saying, you're never going to get the members of whatever Black Presbyterian church to become members here because they don't worship the same way, or New Hope, or any other church. I am not talking about any kind of other event. Because I think it's a fantastic idea to have them or any other church as part of a social event. I'm just saying as far as worship, and I thought that's what you were referring to when you said the segregated hour, because that is the most segregated hour in this country, typically 11 a.m. to 12. But no, as far as anything else, I was not. I think anything else would be welcome for everyone.
Perfect.
So if that was a fun question, which I'm with Fred, we were excited about that one. Wally says they're all fun. This one has been maybe moments where, I think it was you, Paul, that said we really haven't had much hard conversation in racial justice. We're all kind of running on the same thread. This may be a moment in this question where not everyone's run on the same thread, and that is color blindness. Sometimes it's a generational difference. Sometimes it's an understanding. Many feel the temptation to say, I just don't see color. So starting with you, Mike, what do you think it means to be colorblind through, let's call it a social justice or a racial justice or even a Christian lens? I'm going to leave that very open for you to define. When you hear colorblindness, what comes up?
The idea of colorblindness is that you don't see color. When you speak with somebody, when you interact with them, you don't see color. So on its surface, it sounds like a great idea, right? I don't prejudge or post-judge because of certain persons, the pigment of their skin. And That's on the surface, though. You know, in doing a little bit more and learning a little bit more over the last 8 to 10 months, you realize that what you lose when you don't see color is you lose the person. You lose who they are. You lose the beauty of their difference, the beauty of the difference of their culture, of the things they're interested in. So, and because of you lose that, you can't respect it, honor it. You know, it starts to feel, colorblindness starts to feel a little bit like assimilation. So instead of treating everybody like a human, regardless of, and so black people, brown people, people of different cultures and races, just treating them as a group called human, and appreciating their differences, you will eliminate that stuff. And that's not really great because you don't really learn there. We're just all trying to be the same, as opposed to, like, the really awful analogy I'll draw, but I'll do it here because it's my time to screw up a question, is lights on a Christmas tree, right? So I have a Christmas tree, and there are colored lights on the tree, and there are white lights on the tree. And I can take all the blue and green bulbs out and replace them all with white lights, and the tree is still lit up, right? But it's different. Now I take all the white bulbs out, and I replace them with the blues and the greens and the reds and yellow, and it's still lit up, but it's lit up in a more vibrant and living way. And I think that's what happens when you ascribe to color blindness. You lose that vibrancy.
A follow-up question is your Christmas tree still up?
No, but our Christmas lights are. That's on the list for next weekend.
All right. Abby, to you, I know younger generations are rightfully sensitive to this word more, and they've made observations about this. So in your conversations and your learning, what has the connotations of colorblindness been?
It seems to me that it's more invalidating other people's experiences, kind of to add on to what Mr. Draper was saying. And I remember Alex Yakowenko saying at the last panel that we ultimately want to get to the point where we don't see color. We ultimately want to get to the point where we can say that we're colorblind without it having a negative connotation to it, like it does in my head now. And I had really never heard of the term until this committee, because I don't have a lot of encounters with people who say to me, I don't see color, I don't see your color, because I'm not a person of color. And I think we want to get to the point where we don't treat others differently. Like, that's how it should be, that we don't treat them differently, but that we understand them differently, that we understand that their experiences are different than ours, and that their culture is different than ours, and that we need to appreciate some people more because they haven't been appreciated in the past. But being colorblind has mostly comes from people who are in opposition to this movement, and it reminds me of All Lives Matter. It's easier to say all lives matter than white lives matter, and it's easier to be colorblind than to just say, I don't like your blackness. It's easier to say, I don't see your blackness. And we should see blackness, and we should see that Black Lives Matter. And so my thoughts on colorblindness now are people who have bad intentions, because it's the easier thing to say than actually appreciating their experiences.
You can drop that mic if you want.
Yeah. So this question, I'm going to start with
1 second.
I have some comments on colorblindness, 'cause I'm old.
Absolutely.
Okay, I was saying I have some comments on colorblindness because I'm older. Back in the 70s, when I was in high school, I went to a school full of musicians and artists. So when they said colorblind, they just meant, you know, we don't care, you know, whether you're black or purple or green or whatever you are. You're you, we love you, whatever. You know, so that was my original concept. As I've gotten older, especially the past few years, not that I thought anything much about colorblindness as a concept, but throughout my working life, okay, got out of college, so you start working. When people interviewed, especially men, if you walked in and you had dreads or you had any kind of braid or you had, as a person of color, had anything other than a nice, clean cut, hey, you could forget, I don't care where you went, unless you went to Harvard, you could forget getting hired. The same was true with women with braids. At certain businesses, you couldn't wear them. And of course, that's something that primarily people of color do. So when you think about assimilating, that's a way in which these people are being assimilated. So now we watch basketball at home, and these players come out, and they have the most outlandish hair that you ever wanted to see. And I applaud that, because basically at 60 or so, I realized that those haircuts and the perm, which I still have, were things that someone told black people long ago, if you need to be more like the white people or accepted by the white people, you need to have these things. And now, with all of the changes that are coming in our society, people have decided they don't want to be colorblind, they don't want to be assimilated, and this is who I am, and this is what I'm going to do. I just wanted to throw that in.
No, I'm glad you did, and so I'm gonna invert what I just did, because you answered this question at the very beginning when we did the introduction, because you said something that struck me. You said, there's so much I want to learn. There's so much I felt like I need to find out about. And I thought that was really helpful to me. But I'm going to come back to you in just a moment with the question, what do you still want to know more about? So hang with that for a second. I'm going to turn to Paul. But before I turn to Paul, anybody who wants to jump in on this question and throw out a line or a question that you have or something, toss it in. And I'm going to start with Paul and just say, is it a question? Is it a sensitivity? Is it awareness? Is it something that you don't see now, but you think you know there's something there? Where is it that you want to grow and understand more about after all of these things that we've done? Is there something that's weighing on you?
Just to continue the process. To continue the hard conversation. It's not done. I'm not at a point any longer where I can say, well, for the time being, everything's okay now. And this is something that always has to be high on the list of how I go about my business, of being aware of it, and as hard as it is to say, to look for opportunities to have a hard conversation. That's where I'm at now, that I think I can continue to grow exponentially if I can have opportunities for the hard conversation.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else? Is something that you want to know more about, or there's something here you want to learn and see and grow with? Anything before I turn it to Virginia? Mike?
Ways that we as individuals can make a difference. Like what I've learned over the last 8 months is how massive racism is, how multi-layered and deep it lives, right? And the thing I struggled with for a very, very long time is what can I do about that, right? There's not a protest I can go to every week. There's only so many letters I can write. Like, what can I as an individual do? And, you know, so we started to take small steps, right? When we can order books, order them from a Black-owned bookstore. You know, we start to do things, we start to vote with our dollars. When we can choose to buy coffee from a Black-owned coffee manufacturer or tea manufacturer, like those are little steps we can take. And they're tiny drops in the bucket, but if everybody starts to make those drops in the bucket starts to fill a little bit. I think that's something that people, or maybe it's just me, wrestle with, is how can I make a difference? And that's, I was having this conversation with an extended family member this weekend, and it was this very conversation, and I brought up the idea of, you know, there's a great Black-owned coffee manufacturer, and they sell them in Target, they sell them at Whole Foods. And she said, I could do that. I'm like, yeah, you could. Mm-hmm. She said, if I don't like it, does it make me racist? And I said, yes, it does. Mm-hmm. I said, no, it doesn't. But what it did do was it may have changed your perception a little bit, may have changed your conversation a little bit. And I think that's something I want to continue to learn is, what are those little steps, those things that I can do or we can do every day to change our own conversation a little bit?
I'm going to just jump in and to echo off what Mike said, you know, no one is comfortable being called a racist. No one is comfortable being called privileged. But I've never been denied anything because of my race. I've never felt threatened by anyone because of my race. I've never been denied an opportunity. And yet here we are talking about Black Lives Matter, writing statements, having hard conversations, but really racism exists, prejudice exists, and no matter how much we want it to change, the only way we can facilitate that is to learn how to have that conversation. I think we all need to talk more, listen more, and I think we need to explore the systems that are in place that are perpetrating this racism.
Thanks, Maggie. Garry?
Just one small thing, working off of the thought of learning more and listening more. I definitely appreciate that part of it, but one thing that as part of my own personal education, is when I flip through the newspaper or a magazine and I see the article with a racist theme to it, or there's a question or whatever, instead of just flipping the page, I find myself now going back and looking at it. What is the topic? What is going on? Again, trying to get the understanding going. And I hope that we collectively can convince more people to continue their education and therefore stem the tide and cut it a little bit shorter than the next 200 years, as Paul was saying before.
I'll try and be quick. I don't want to take up anybody's time. One thing that stuck out to me about 4 years ago when we watched people march in South Carolina with their tiki torches and their polos, I was struck by how many of them were my age. I grew up with the assumption that there would be a natural arc towards progress. You know, the first election that I participated in was the election of Barack Obama in 2008. And I thought, you know what? I wasn't so naive to think that meant racism was dead. But I was like, you know what? It's clear that there's the non-racists outnumber the racists by a considerable margin, and it's just going to be less and less of a problem every year. And I think that led to a laziness on my part and inactivity. Just an assumption that, every year we be a little bit better and I wouldn't have to do anything. What I'd like to know is how, not just how I can do better, how I can be more active, but I also just wish I knew, what, I want to be more aware of the ways that people are taught racism, because at the very least, it was a thing it's no longer socially acceptable. Nobody wants to be called a racist anymore. But it's still something that's being taught. The attitudes of racism are still something that's being taught both through the inherent systems that have been in place for centuries, but also just from parent to child, from specific sources of information, news sources, biased news sources. And I want to learn how to be more literate and teach that literacy to others, because I don't want to take for granted anymore the assumption that, that the 200 years are going to happen on their own. The 200 years were so odd that we still have to go. We're going to just happen, that we're just going to be recycling new people into a mix.
Thanks, Wally. So, what do you want to learn?
I want to gain a better understanding of why the white people that are in denial that this racism actually exists, I want to understand why they feel that it doesn't exist. It's like so far beyond me. At this point, between watching media and it constantly runs through my mind, and I don't know if I could fix it on an individual basis or help them, but I just have this great need to understand how any intelligent human being should think that the shade of somebody's skin would make a difference. I just cannot grasp it. So that's what I want to learn, and do my best to find out.
Thanks, Virginia.
Last question, and I'm just going to ask Mike this question as the co-chair to this committee, along with Reynolds, Shaw. What's next? What are our next steps as a church, as you envision them, as we envision them?
I want to echo something that Paul said. We as a committee have had some spirited conversations, but we've not had any hard conversations. And the reason we haven't had any hard conversations is because we haven't met with any resistance. And I think we can only move the needle so far until we can have conversations or provide a safe place for people to have honest conversations and not feel like they're wrong or they're, bad people or what have you. I think we have to find a way to do that. That's the next step, is to invite more people in the conversation, people who don't think like us, and make that okay. If we've learned anything over the last, year or two in the political cycle, we're divided. And right now I feel like people's instincts are to dig their heels in. And I think we need to find a way that people don't have to do that we can have a civil discord about racism and maybe still disagree, but maybe gain a little bit more understanding, like to what Virginia was just talking about. How is it possible that people don't understand that? 'Cause I've had that conversation. I've had it with people who don't seem to understand it, and it's frustrating. and there's lots of answers. Well, it's gotten so much better. Nothing makes me angrier than when I hear that. But I think that's the next step, is we have to provide a safe place for people to have any kind of conversation, because my fear is we begin to speak to ourselves.
Well said. So I want to join everyone else present and thank you all for doing this, for sharing how you feel, what you think. I know that puts you in a vulnerable space, but if we could all just thank our panelists for... And I had to put applause in there because Mike said he would only do this if he was applauded. So, yeah. So we're still doing this for quite some time, and just a few next steps are March 21st will be the next book discussion on how to be an anti-racist, chapters 12 through 15. I feel like it's just getting good. Like we're halfway through the book and it is getting good. And then April 18th, we're going to close the book, chapters 16 through 18. So not much reading left. I hope you can consider, even if you haven't read the book, join the conversation. And then we don't fully know how this is going to work, and it's probably our bad for inviting a bunch of other clergy into this space.
Oh, yeah.
But we're excited. We're calling it an interfaithful discussion on racial justice. Interfaith, interfaithful. We think we're cute. That'll be Monday, April 19th, 7 p.m. That will be broadcast to all houses of worship who are participating. And that ties us into the main event.
So the fellow who wrote the book is going to be joining us virtually April 28th. Abram Kendi will be connecting with us virtually. And our civility speaker from now 2 years ago, Amanda Ripley, will be moderating it. She'll be the one asking him the questions and developing the conversation. And we have the ability to have 400 people join. And so we're really excited about this. 11 churches have sponsored this already, which is a very exciting thing. And I look forward to it, April 28th, 7 o'clock. And we're going to be sending out an invitation to sign up soon through Eventbrite. And I am learning all these technological things. So Virginia, I mean, this is just learning upon learning upon learning. And I don't know how the whole Zoom thing works with 400 people, but I'm told it does. So look forward to that event. And I think it'll be a nice moment for us to hear from someone who's had a big impact on this conversation in the nation and a big impact on our conversation. So can I close this with prayer? Okay. Almighty and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, for the love that you've given to us. Let that love be the strength that gathers us when we agree, when we disagree, when we are confused, when we're clear. Give us humility, give us honesty, but mostly give us hands that find the other and embrace with love. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.